She walked out, drive in hand, numb to the cold, immune to the fear. Somewhere deep inside, she knew the upload had to happen. Not for revenge, not even for justice, but to break the machine that had played God with people's lives. She uploaded the drive from a stolen device in a motel an hour later. It hit every major platform within minutes. But here's the twist no one expected. He begged her not to release the drive. Said it would trigger a failsafe.
That too many people were involved now.
But Lila didn't hear him. The footage was scrambled. The faces blurred. The voices distorted. The world didn't see what Lila saw. Someone had already intercepted it, rewritten it, turned her proof into disinformation. The comments filled with doubt. Conspiracy theories. Trolls. Gaslighting. Her story became just another internet rabbit hole. And when she tried to speak again, she was already gone. Or maybe she never existed. 2 of 2.
You said.
Months passed, and the name Lila Carson quietly faded from the headlines, lost in the algorithmic churn of trending news and viral distractions. Her upload had become digital folklore, debunked by some, dissected by others, buried under layers of speculation and online noise. People argued over whether she was a whistleblower, a mentally unstable woman, or just an elaborate hoax fed into the bloodstream of the internet by shadowy operatives to test public response. Whatever the theory, the truth was that no one could verify where she went, if she ever made another appearance, or whether the video was real at all. Government agencies issued statements denying involvement in any covert psychological operations, and the corporations named in the leaked footage all responded with carefully worded denials, calling the tape manipulated, deep-faked, and completely fabricated. In the end, the story unraveled publicly just as easily as it had unraveled privately, thread by thread, until it disappeared into static. But those who looked closely enough, they knew. They remembered her face, her voice trembling with urgency, her eyes haunted by truths she didn't want to carry. And those same people began to see things. Patterns. Gaps in their own histories. Small details that didn't add up. They noticed moments of déjà vu that felt too deliberate, relationships that shifted overnight, sudden urges to forget something they hadn't even realized they knew. It was subtle, but it was there, a ripple in the fabric of reality that could no longer be ignored. Somewhere far from the city, in a remote mountain town where cell towers barely reached and no one asked questions, a woman named Elise started working at a small bookstore tucked between a bakery and an antique shop. She kept to herself, never spoke of her past, and had no digital footprint. She spent her days shelving books with titles like The Ethics of Memory and Invisible Wars, and at night she'd sit by the fire with an old analog camera, taking pictures of the stars. Her landlord said she was kind, a bit quiet, but always paid on time and brought tea during storms. No one suspected she had once been at the center of something enormous, something engineered to destroy her sense of self. Elise was her new name.
Her choice.
Not assigned, not implanted, not programmed. Just hers. But even in that quiet life, far from the broken city and its hidden networks, Elise couldn't quite forget. There were nights when she'd wake drenched in sweat, heart racing, certain that someone was outside her window. She'd clutch a flash drive that never left her neck, even though its contents were scrambled, unreadable, just fragments of the truth now, a puzzle no one could finish. Yet she held onto it like a relic of who she had been, and everything she had lost. The twist, of course, was never just about Emily, or Reeves, or the shadowy institution pulling the strings. It was about something deeper, more unsettling, the idea that our memories, our identities, could be manufactured, edited without our consent. And if that's true, how do we know which parts of ourselves are real? How many of our relationships, convictions, fears, and dreams are authentically ours, and how many were subtly shaped to serve someone else's agenda? Elise didn't have all the answers, but she had something more important now, freedom. Not the kind measured in distance or anonymity, but the kind that comes from knowing the truth, no matter how fractured or terrifying it may be. She'd lived through the unraveling, survived the collapse of certainty, and rebuilt herself from the ruins. That, in itself, was an act of rebellion. Back in the city, Kayla Voss's disappearance sparked another brief surge of conspiracy chatter online, especially when her personal files were dumped onto a dark web forum marked with the tag #SyntheticTruth. Among the documents were partial blueprints, names, and timelines. None of it confirmed, all of it chilling. And in one final clip, grainy and full of static, a woman's voice could be heard whispering, "The system only works if you believe what it tells you to forget." That line became a mantra for a growing movement of digital dissenters, people who refused to let go of the story. They wore masks in protest, printed flyers with scrambled versions of Lila's photo, and posted videos that mimicked the style of the leaked footage. Whether they were chasing the truth or chasing shadows no longer mattered. The idea had taken root. Elise never joined the movement. She didn't return to expose more or reclaim her past. Instead, she lived quietly, breathing in her own rhythm, watching the seasons change without fear. But sometimes, when a stranger walked into the bookstore and looked at her just a second too long, she'd wonder if they recognized her, if they remembered. And once in a while, when she was alone, she'd speak softly to the air. "Emily, if you were ever real, I still love you." A whisper into the void, an echo of a connection too deep to erase. In the end, the story didn't go viral. It didn't get turned into a Netflix doc or make the front page of every paper. It just lingered, like static in the background of your favorite song, or a face in a dream you can't quite place. But for those who paid attention, for those who saw past the noise and dared to question everything, it was a warning. Some truths aren't buried. They're hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to notice. And once you do, there's no going back. Not ever. She walked out, drive in hand, numb to the cold, immune to the fear. Somewhere deep inside, she knew the upload had to happen. Not for revenge. Not even for justice, but to break the machine that had played God with people's lives. She uploaded the drive from a stolen device in a motel an hour later. It hit every major platform within minutes. But here's the twist no one expected. He begged her not to release the drive, said it would trigger a failsafe.
That too many people were involved now.
But Lila didn't hear him. The footage was scrambled, the faces blurred, the voices distorted. The world didn't see what Lila saw. Someone had already intercepted it, rewritten it, turned her proof into disinformation. The comments filled with doubt, conspiracy theories, trolls, gaslighting. Her story became just another internet rabbit hole. And when she tried to speak again, she was already gone. Or maybe she never existed. 2 of 2.
You said.
Months passed, and the name Lila Carson quietly faded from the headlines, lost in the algorithmic churn of trending news and viral distractions. Her upload had become digital folklore, debunked by some, dissected by others, buried under layers of speculation and online noise. People argued over whether she was a whistleblower, a mentally unstable woman, or just an elaborate hoax fed into the bloodstream of the internet by shadowy operatives to test public response. Whatever the theory, the truth was that no one could verify where she went, if she ever made another appearance, or whether the video was real at all. Government agencies issued statements denying involvement in any covert psychological operations, and the corporations named in the leaked footage all responded with carefully worded denials, calling the tape manipulated, deep-faked, and completely fabricated. In the end, the story unraveled publicly just as easily as it had unraveled privately, thread by thread, until it disappeared into static. But those who looked closely enough, they knew. They remembered her face, her voice trembling with urgency, her eyes haunted by truths she didn't want to carry. And those same people began to see things. Patterns. Gaps in their own histories. Small details that didn't add up. They noticed moments of déjà vu that felt too deliberate, relationships that shifted overnight, sudden urges to forget something they hadn't even realized they knew. It was subtle, but it was there, a ripple in the fabric of reality that could no longer be ignored. Somewhere far from the city, In a remote mountain town where cell towers barely reached and no one asked questions, a woman named Elise started working at a small bookstore tucked between a bakery and an antique shop. She kept to herself, never spoke of her past, and had no digital footprint. She spent her days shelving books with titles like The Ethics of Memory and Invisible Wars, and at night she'd sit by the fire with an old analog camera, taking pictures of the stars. Her landlord said she was kind, a bit quiet, but always paid on time and brought tea during storms. No one suspected she had once been at the center of something enormous, something engineered to destroy her sense of self. Elise was her new name.
Her choice.
Not assigned, not implanted, not programmed. Just hers. But even in that quiet life, far from the broken city and its hidden networks, Elise couldn't quite forget. There were nights when she'd wake drenched in sweat, heart racing, certain that someone was outside her window. She'd clutch a flash drive that never left her neck, even though its contents were scrambled, unreadable, just fragments of the truth now, a puzzle no one could finish. Yet she held onto it like a relic of who she had been, and everything she had lost. The twist, of course, was never just about Emily, or Reeves, or the shadowy institution pulling the strings. It was about something deeper, more unsettling, the idea that our memories, our identities, could be manufactured, edited without our consent. And if that's true, how do we know which parts of ourselves are real? How many of our relationships, convictions, fears, and dreams are authentically ours, and how many were subtly shaped to serve someone else's agenda? Elise didn't have all the answers, but she had something more important now: freedom. Not the kind measured in distance or anonymity, but the kind that comes from knowing the truth, no matter how fractured or terrifying it may be. She'd lived through the unraveling, survived the collapse of certainty, and rebuilt herself from the ruins. That, in itself, was an act of rebellion. Back in the city, Kayla Voss's disappearance sparked another brief surge of conspiracy chatter online, especially when her personal files were dumped onto a dark web forum marked with the tag #synthetic_truth. Among the documents were partial blueprints, names, and timelines. None of it confirmed, all of it chilling. And in one final clip, grainy and full of static, a woman's voice could be heard whispering, "The system only works if you believe what it tells you to forget." That line became a mantra for a growing movement of digital dissenters, people who refused to let go of the story. They wore masks in protest, printed flyers with scrambled versions of Lila's photo, and posted videos that mimicked the style of the leaked footage. Whether they were chasing the truth or chasing shadows no longer mattered. The idea had taken root. Elise never joined the movement. She didn't return to expose more or reclaim her past. Instead, she lived quietly, breathing in her own rhythm, watching the seasons change without fear. But sometimes, when a stranger walked into the bookstore and looked at her just a second too long, she'd wonder if they recognized her, if they remembered. And once in a while, when she was alone, she'd speak softly to the air. "Emily, if you were ever real, I still love you." A whisper into the void, an echo of a connection too deep to erase. In the end, the story didn't go viral. It didn't get turned into a Netflix doc or make the front page of every paper. It just lingered, like static in the background of your favorite song, or a face in a dream you can't quite place. But for those who paid attention, for those who saw past the noise and dared to question everything, it was a warning. Some truths aren't buried. They're hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to notice. And once you do, there's no going back. Not ever. It's just another quiet neighborhood. Middle class, family-oriented, where everyone knows everyone, or at least thinks they do. The kind of place where kids ride bikes in cul-de-sacs, neighbors wave while mowing the lawn, and porch lights flicker on at the same time every evening. But behind one perfectly manicured lawn and white picket fence, a secret was festering. Dark, calculated, and captured on camera. Hidden not in some obscure location, but right out in the open. In this video, we're going to walk you through one of the most chilling, mind-bending discoveries law enforcement has ever made. A murder not just caught on video, but left right under everyone's noses. You came here looking for answers, and I promise you're going to get them. But what you uncover might just shake your perception of trust, love, and safety in your own home. Imagine living with someone for years, sharing meals, vacations, bedtime routines, even dreams, and never knowing they were capable of unspeakable evil. That's the psychological weight this story carries. And that's exactly why I need you to stay with me through every second of this video. Because this isn't just about a crime. It's about the terrifying idea that sometimes the most dangerous monsters wear wedding rings and sleep beside you at night. As we peel back the layers of this story, you're going to find yourself questioning how well you really know the people closest to you. And trust me, it's not just about what happened. It's how it was discovered that will leave you speechless. Stick around, because this isn't the kind of case that slowly unravels, it explodes. Now, let's talk about what led investigators to this twisted revelation. A missing person report is filed. Not unusual. People disappear every day, arguments happen, breakdowns occur, and sometimes people just want to vanish. But this case didn't feel right from the start. There was no sign of struggle, no trail to follow, and most chilling of all, the husband was oddly calm.
Too calm.
If you've followed true crime stories before, you know that emotional detachment is one of the first red flags detectives look for. But even seasoned officers were stunned when the truth began to surface. And the way it all came to light? Not through forensics, not through confessions, not through witness testimony, but through a piece of digital evidence that had been hiding in plain sight in a place so obvious, so routine, no one thought to look, until someone did. You might be thinking, how could something so horrific be hiding right in front of everyone? How could a man go about his everyday life, walking the dog, chatting with coworkers, posting on social media, while secretly harboring the darkest crime imaginable? That's what makes this story not just disturbing, but psychologically gripping. It taps into our deepest fear, the fear that we might miss the signs, that evil doesn't always come with red flags and flashing lights. Sometimes, it looks exactly like the person you promised forever to. That's why this case has exploded across platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Reddit, and is now being discussed as one of the most disturbing hidden-in-plain-sight cases in recent history. You'll hear about the creepy surveillance footage, the bizarre behavior captured on Ring cameras, and the mind games that kept everyone fooled until the moment everything came crashing down. Let's get personal for a second. If you've ever trusted someone deeply, whether it was a partner, a spouse, or even a close friend, this story is going to hit hard. Because the betrayal wasn't just physical. It was emotional. It was psychological. This man wasn't just trying to get away with murder. He was trying to erase someone's entire existence while pretending nothing had changed. And the only reason he didn't succeed is because of one moment, a brilliant, almost accidental move by a young detective who trusted their gut and decided to rewatch what everyone else had ignored. That's the master move that turned this from a cold case into an unraveling nightmare. I want you to pay close attention to what happens next, because it's going to show you just how close this man came to walking away completely free. Throughout this video, we'll meet the key figures at the heart of this case. The victim, a woman who had dreams, a future, and people who loved her deeply. The husband, whose charm and normalcy masked a chilling dual life, and the investigators, whose instincts and persistence uncovered the truth. We'll also explore the role of technology, how smart homes, digital backups, and cloud storage played a crucial part in capturing a crime that was supposed to be invisible. Themes of control, deception, and digital breadcrumbs will run through this entire story, and as we follow the case step by step, you'll start to see just how fragile the line between innocence and guilt can be in the modern world. But I want to be clear, this isn't just a story for the sake of shock value. It's a reminder, a wake-up call. Because if something like this can happen in a quiet suburb with a well-liked couple, it can happen anywhere. That's why true crime matters. Not just to scare us, but to prepare us, to open our eyes, and to help us recognize the signs we often miss. By the time we reach the end of this video, you'll have seen the clues that others overlooked, the warning signs buried beneath years of manipulation, and the chilling moment when police finally saw what had been there the entire time. And just when you think you've figured it all out, just when you're sure you know what happened and how, it takes a turn. One final twist that changes everything. Something buried inside the footage that not even the detectives expected. Something that blows the case wide open and makes you question not only the killer's motives, but his mind itself. And that, right there, is where we'll pick up next. Because the footage, it didn't just capture a crime. It revealed a hidden obsession, a dark ritual, and something that may suggest this wasn't his first time. Stick around, because what's coming next will haunt you. Just 6 months before the horrific footage came to light, Nathan and Emily Harris were the definition of a perfect couple, or at least that's how it looked from the outside. They were high school sweethearts who had been married for nearly a decade, living in a cozy 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood outside of Denver, Colorado. Nathan worked remotely as a freelance graphic designer, while Emily held a steady job at a nearby elementary school as a second-grade teacher. They attended church most Sundays, hosted summer barbecues, and frequently posted cheerful pictures together on Instagram, smiling during hikes in the Rockies, sipping coffee in matching mugs, and cuddling their golden retriever, Baxter. Their digital life painted a picture of love and stability, the kind of marriage many would envy. But behind those curated snapshots was something far more complex, something dark, tangled, and dangerously close to snapping. In the weeks leading up to Emily's disappearance, subtle changes began to surface. Friends noticed that Emily had become quieter, less active on social media, and seemed distracted during conversations. She once confided in a close coworker that she and Nathan were going through a rough patch, but she never elaborated. That coworker, who later gave an emotional interview, recalled Emily saying something cryptic. "Sometimes I feel like I don't recognize the man I married." But in hindsight, it felt like a warning, a whisper of something deeper that no one picked up on. Even more unsettling were the brief glimpses of tension caught in Ring camera clips. Neighbors who had access to shared footage recalled overhearing muffled arguments through open windows, abrupt door slams late at night, and one instance where Emily appeared to be crying while unlocking her car in the driveway. Still, nothing concrete suggested what was to come. At the time, it sounded like a casual complaint, the kind of thing people say when relationships hit a slump. Emily was the kind of person who pushed through discomfort with a smile. She loved her students, always brought cupcakes to the staff lounge on Fridays, and had even been planning a surprise trip to New Orleans for their upcoming anniversary. All signs pointed to someone trying to hold everything together, which is why her sudden disappearance on a rainy Thursday morning sent shockwaves through their community. Nathan told police she had left for work like usual, kissed him goodbye at the door, and never came home. He said he assumed she was stuck in a meeting or had car trouble. But by nightfall, her phone had gone dark. No texts, no calls, no GPS pings. That's when her sister, Sarah, reported her missing, and that's when everything began to unravel. When detectives first interviewed Nathan, he appeared cooperative, maybe even too cooperative. He volunteered details before they were asked, offered to unlock his phone, and recounted their last day together with practiced calm. He even handed over their home's security system access, confident there was nothing to hide. But there was something off. Detectives later admitted that Nathan's tone lacked urgency, no fear, no anxiety, just a cold kind of detachment. Still, without physical evidence or a crime scene, there wasn't much they could do. The case lingered in limbo for weeks, the search efforts exhausting every possible lead: forests, parking lots, rivers. Volunteers combed through trails and abandoned cabins. True crime forums erupted with theories, and Emily's story trended across YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok. Hashtags like #FindEmily and #VanishedInPlainSight were everywhere. And with each passing day, suspicions began to shift from the unknown to the unsettlingly familiar. Despite the growing suspicion, there were other names floating in the rumor mill. A fellow teacher at the school who had exchanged unusually friendly texts with Emily. A neighbor down the street, recently released from jail, who had a habit of watching people from his porch. Even Emily's sister Sarah was briefly whispered about online. After all, family conflicts are not unheard of in missing person cases. But those threads unraveled quickly. The coworker had a solid alibi, backed by time-stamped classroom footage. The neighbor had been away on a fishing trip the weekend Emily vanished. And Sarah? She had been out of town visiting their mother, as confirmed by multiple receipts and video calls. Still, the red herrings worked to build layers of distraction, clouding the truth and keeping everyone guessing. The turning point came when a young detective named Lila Monroe, fresh out of training but sharp as a tack, decided to go over every single file submitted during the initial search. She was obsessed with detail, the kind of person who noticed what others missed. While reviewing the couple's home security footage again, she noticed a gap, just a few seconds of silence in a seemingly normal recording. To most, it would have seemed like a glitch. But to Lila, it was suspicious. She dug deeper, pulling metadata from the cloud storage backup and comparing timestamps with audio logs. What she found was chilling. Hidden beneath routine surveillance clips was an encrypted folder, one that hadn't shown up during the first pass because it was disguised under a benign file name, Dog Training 2023, MP4. When that file was finally decrypted and opened, the horror unfolded. It wasn't training footage. It was something far more sinister, raw, uncut, and damning. A recording from the couple's own living room, showing a version of Nathan no one had ever seen before. The video was grainy, taken at night, and the audio was muffled, but it captured enough to send shockwaves through the precinct. The movements, the expressions, the eerie calm. It was all there. What made it even more disturbing was the angle of the recording. It wasn't hidden or accidental. It was intentional. The camera had been positioned deliberately, suggesting not just premeditation, but an almost ritualistic planning. And in that moment, detectives realized they weren't dealing with a sudden burst of rage. This was methodical. This was calculated. And worst of all, it had been sitting in the cloud, waiting to be discovered, while Nathan continued living his life as if nothing had happened. But even with the footage, the case wasn't airtight. There were still unanswered questions. Why film it at all? Why keep it? Why not destroy the evidence? Was it a trophy? A psychological need to relive the moment? Or was there someone else involved, someone he trusted, someone who had access to the footage and chose not to say anything? The uncertainty only deepened when they uncovered fragments of other recordings, incomplete and corrupted, suggesting this might not have been the only time he'd filmed something disturbing. The implications were terrifying. Could there be another victim? Was Emily really the first? As these questions mount, so does the tension. What if Nathan wasn't acting alone? What if the camera wasn't set up by him at all? And what if the truth, the real truth, is still hidden somewhere, on another device, in another file, or worse, in someone else's hands? Because here's the most disturbing part, someone else knew. Someone else saw the footage before the police did. And what they did next will change everything. Just as the investigation was gaining momentum, everything took an unexpected and deeply unsettling turn. The footage that Detective Lila Monroe had uncovered, the very file that seemed to hold the key to Emily's disappearance, vanished. Not just from the cloud, but from every backup, every external drive, every secure server it had been saved to. At first, the department thought it was a tech glitch, maybe a clerical error or corruption during file transfer. But when the IT forensics team couldn't recover even a single byte, it became painfully clear this wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate wipe. Someone had gotten into the system and scrubbed the evidence clean, down to the metadata. That video was gone, and with it, the strongest lead they had. Lila was devastated. She had staked her instincts and her rising career on that footage. And now, the case was sliding back into murky territory, with no proof and a suspect who continued to smile in the face of growing suspicion. What made things worse was the arrival of a stern email from a private law firm, one that Nathan apparently retained just days after Emily's disappearance. The message was clear. Any further questioning of Nathan without formal charges would be met with legal action. It was a bold, aggressive move, and it spooked some of the senior detectives. Suddenly, the pressure shifted. Supervisors began discouraging Lila from continuing her deep dive, warning her that she was venturing into dangerous territory without enough support. But Lila couldn't let it go. Something about Nathan's behavior and the sudden disappearance of that crucial video. And now, someone was actively working to bury the truth. Then came the letter. It arrived at Lila's desk, unmarked envelope, typed with no return address. Told her that this case wasn't just about one missing woman, it was something bigger, something more calculated. Inside was a single page that read, "Stop digging or you'll end up like her." There was no signature, no fingerprints, and no surveillance footage of who dropped it off. Lila took it straight to her superior, but the response was lukewarm at best. He brushed it off as a prank or a sick coincidence, maybe even a hoax meant to distract her from the real work. But Lila knew better. The timing was too perfect. Someone didn't just want the investigation to slow down, they wanted it to stop. And now it was personal. Determined not to let fear control her, Lila turned her attention to Nathan's past, hoping to find anything, no matter how small, that could explain his transformation from loving husband to potential killer. She pulled marriage records, employment history, and even his old college records. That's when she uncovered something strange. Nathan had changed his last name in his early 20s, shortly after moving out of state. His original name was tied to a sealed juvenile record in Texas, one that the system tried hard to keep buried. With a few calls and a favor from a contact in Dallas PD, Lila managed to get a partial redacted report. The details were vague, but one word stood out: unresolved disappearance. A girl named Claire had vanished when Nathan was just 17 years old. No charges were filed, but Nathan, then going by a different name, had been questioned extensively and was described as a person of interest who displayed inconsistent statements. That old case had never been solved, and it had been quietly swept under the rug. Suddenly, a disturbing pattern began to form: two missing women, years apart, with the same man at the center. But when Lila tried to cross-reference files from the Texas case, she hit another wall. Records that should have been public had been sealed tighter than expected. Not just due to privacy laws, but by a court order that had come in just a few years ago, after Nathan had already settled down with Emily. It was almost as if someone had gone back and scrubbed his past clean, removing every trace that could link him to a previous crime. And when she asked about the judge who signed that order, she found something even more bizarre. The judge had recently passed away under suspicious circumstances, a fall from a hotel balcony that was still being investigated as undetermined cause. Coincidence? Or something more sinister? Meanwhile, new players started entering the picture. A family friend of Emily's named Laura, who had been strangely absent during the search efforts, reappeared with a story that raised more questions than answers. She claimed that Emily had confided in her just weeks before her disappearance, sharing fears about Nathan's behavior and even suggesting she'd found something disturbing on his laptop, something Emily was too afraid to show anyone. Laura had ignored it at the time, thinking it was paranoia or just stress from work. But now, she was racked with guilt. Still, when Lila asked to see their text messages, Laura hesitated.
Her phone had been stolen, she said.
Just days after Emily disappeared. Whether it was fear, guilt, or something else entirely, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that Laura was holding something back. Maybe she knew more than she let on. Maybe she had seen the footage and kept quiet. Or maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the friend Emily thought she was. There was a subtle shift in her eyes when Lila mentioned the missing video, a flicker of recognition that vanished too quickly. But without proof, Lila couldn't press further. All she could do was watch and wait for someone to slip up. And then, just when it seemed the case had stalled again, an anonymous message appeared in Lila's inbox. No subject line, no sender, just a video attachment titled, "Look Closer." It was a screen recording, just 45 seconds long, of a folder being opened on a desktop. Inside were dozens of video files, all with names that matched the structure of the missing dog training 2023 clip. Most were blank or corrupted, but one had a thumbnail, a single freeze frame. Emily's face, terrified, illuminated by a single light source, staring directly into the camera. And then the screen cut to black.
You said.
Detective Lila Monroe stared at the screen, her breath catching as Emily's terrified face flashed before it abruptly went black. She replayed it 3 times, hoping to catch something she missed, a reflection, a background noise, any small clue, but the video was silent and grainy, like it had been deliberately degraded. This wasn't just a breadcrumb, it was a threat, a taunt. Someone was playing a twisted game, and they wanted her to know she was being watched. But before she could even begin to trace the IP address or figure out who sent the clip, something else happened. Something that cracked the already fragile surface of the case even wider. Across town, Emily's younger sister, Grace, who had been staying quiet through most of the investigation, received an eerily similar email. No text, no explanation, just a single video attachment. But unlike Lila's footage, Grace's video wasn't of Emily. It was of herself, walking through a parking garage 2 days prior, captured from what looked like a dashcam or hidden security feed. The message was clear. You're next if you keep asking questions. Grace, shaking and terrified, immediately forwarded the file to the department, but by the time the digital forensics team began analyzing it, the metadata had already been wiped. Someone was operating with advanced tools typically used by professionals. And that's when another troubling realization surfaced. Nathan worked for a cybersecurity firm, one that specialized in surveillance software for government contracts. Not only did he have the knowledge to cover his digital tracks, he likely had access to high-grade tools that allowed him to monitor, manipulate, and erase footage on demand. Suddenly, all the missing pieces started to make more sense, but the clarity only made the situation more terrifying. If Nathan was behind this, he wasn't just a man spiraling out of control. He was organized, calculating, and several steps ahead of them. But then something strange happened that shook Lila to her core. One of the original detectives on Emily's case, Detective Marcus Green, requested an urgent private meeting with her. He had been pulled off the investigation early on due to medical leave, though rumors whispered something about internal politics and conflict of interest. When they finally met in a dim corner of a local diner, Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in days. He slid a flash drive across the table and warned her not to plug it into any department systems. Use a burner laptop, he said. And don't open it where you sleep. Lila didn't know whether to be alarmed or skeptical. But something in his expression, a haunted mix of regret and dread, convinced her to take the risk. That night, using an off-grid device, she opened the files. Inside were unredacted reports from the original missing persons case, including audio recordings of an early interview with Grace, an interview Lila hadn't even known existed. But the most damning file was a digital receipt. Nathan had purchased a high-end encrypted video editing software suite just days before Emily disappeared. The transaction had been buried under a business expense report, and only Marcus had flagged it as suspicious before being sidelined. Meanwhile, Grace began receiving phone calls at odd hours. The caller never spoke, but she could hear her own voice echoing back, recordings of private conversations she'd had in the supposed safety of her apartment. Her sense of security dissolved, paranoia taking its place. She stopped answering her door, installed multiple locks, and even began sleeping with a kitchen knife beside her bed. But what truly pushed her over the edge was what she found behind a loose baseboard in her closet, an old, dust-covered phone, powered off, but with one photo left in its storage. It was Emily, bruised, tied to a chair, eyes wide with terror, and the timestamp showed it had been taken nearly 3 weeks after she was officially declared missing. The phone was never hers, and Grace had never seen it before, which meant someone planted it there, recently. Someone had been in her apartment, and they left the device not as a message, but as a warning. As the days dragged on, Lila and Grace weren't the only ones starting to unravel. Even Nathan's coworkers began whispering among themselves. One intern, who had recently left the company, reached out to Lila anonymously. He claimed he overheard a conversation between Nathan and a private contractor about video suppression protocols and clean removals. At the time, the intern thought it was just corporate jargon for data security. But after hearing about Emily's disappearance and the vanishing evidence, he started questioning everything. When Lila pressed for more, he refused to meet in person, terrified for his safety. But before he cut contact, he left her with a chilling statement. He knew exactly how to disappear someone, digitally and physically. That's why no one's ever found her. He doesn't make mistakes. He scripts them. At this point, every thread Lila pulled led to more questions. Nothing about Nathan's life was what it seemed. Even his marriage to Emily, once portrayed as storybook perfect on social media, had cracks deep enough to swallow them whole. Lila began rewatching old Instagram stories, archived Facebook posts, and YouTube vlogs, looking for moments where Emily's smile faltered, where Nathan's grip lingered too long, where the background showed things not meant to be seen. And that's when she spotted something subtle, but horrifying. In a birthday post from 2 years ago, Emily is seen blowing out candles while Nathan films from the corner of the room. But reflected faintly in the mirror behind her is a camera, mounted and pointed directly at the bed. A camera that Emily never mentioned. A camera that was never found in the police search. Now the stakes were no longer about finding Emily. They were about surviving the fallout of a predator who had meticulously controlled his narrative for years. And just as Lila prepared to confront Nathan again, with everything she had, another piece of evidence landed in her lap. A second flash drive. No label. No sender. But this time, it didn't show Emily. It showed someone else. A woman from Nathan's past.
Bound. Gagged. Crying.
And the date on the footage? 10 years ago. And just like that, everything Lila thought she knew about the case unraveled into something darker, deeper, and far more dangerous than she ever imagined.
You said.
Lila Monroe had always believed that obsession was a side effect of justice, that when the truth was buried deep enough, you had to dig like your life depended on it. But she never expected that metaphor to become literal. The morning after she received the second flash drive, she noticed her mailbox was ajar. Inside was a single Polaroid, the kind no one really used anymore. It showed her walking to her car the day before, holding the very drive in her hand. Someone had taken the photo from no more than 20 feet away. Her throat tightened. The timestamp wasn't printed, but scrawled in thick black ink were 3 words. "We see you." She dropped it as if it burned her fingers. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. She was being watched, followed, targeted, and someone was making sure she knew it. For days, Lila moved through shadows, her mind spiraling into worst-case scenarios. The once familiar comfort of her home now felt like a glass cage. She unplugged her smart speakers, covered her laptop's camera with tape, and turned off every device she owned. But even silence felt staged, like someone was listening from beyond the walls. Her instincts, honed over a decade in law enforcement, were screaming. At work, colleagues began looking at her differently. Conversations hushed when she entered the room. Files she needed were suddenly missing, and requests for backup were ignored or delayed. It was subtle, orchestrated. Someone was tightening a noose around her without ever leaving fingerprints. And the worst part? She didn't know who to trust. When she confronted her captain about the missing interview files from Grace's initial statement, he brushed her off with corporate ease. They must have been misfiled during transition. But Lila knew better. Files don't just vanish from secure servers without intent. Then, without warning, Grace went radio silent. Texts unread. Calls went straight to voicemail. Lila drove to her apartment, heart pounding, only to find the door wide open and the place ransacked. The television was on, flickering static, and the fridge stood open, humming like a mechanical whisper. But the scariest thing? There was no sign of struggle. No broken glass. No blood. Just absence, eerie and deliberate. Grace's laptop was missing. Her journals were gone. Her closet was stripped of personal items, as if someone had erased her existence in a matter of hours. On the kitchen table, someone had left a red thumb drive inside a coffee mug, Grace's favorite one, with a cartoon ghost and the words "Boo, bitch" printed in pink cursive. Lila didn't take it to the precinct. She knew better now. Trust was a liability. Back at her place, she played the file using a wiped burner laptop. The footage was more polished this time, less like surveillance and more like a carefully edited confession. But not from Grace. It was a man, face mostly hidden in shadow, speaking with a calm, even tone. He never identified himself, but his message was bone-chilling in its precision. "You've seen too much, detective. But not enough to stop it. We're not just watching. We're controlling. And every move you make, every person you drag into this, makes it worse for you." His voice never cracked, never wavered. It was the kind of voice that belonged to someone who'd done this before, many times. "Emily," was the beginning. "You're the next lesson." Lila sat frozen, her palms slick with sweat, heartbeat stuttering as her mind ran wild. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about survival. The case had metastasized into something far darker, some kind of organized system of control, manipulation, and erasure. Nathan was at the center, but clearly, he wasn't working alone. She thought back to the second flash drive, the woman in the footage. She still hadn't identified her. Could there be others? A pattern of disappearances that had gone undetected because the evidence was so carefully destroyed, the victims deliberately discredited or made to look like runaways. Lila's head throbbed with the weight of it all. She remembered the intern's warning. He scripts them. These weren't crimes of passion. They were productions, acted out, recorded, edited, archived. 4. She changed her routine, doubled back randomly, carried a concealed weapon at all times. Still, the feeling never left her. The sense that she was prey in a maze she couldn't even see. She started checking under her car before starting it, sweeping her apartment with bug detectors she bought online, even sleeping in different rooms. Her reflection in the mirror grew unfamiliar. Haunted eyes, strained smile, the face of someone unraveling. But nothing compared to what she found next. She noticed a black SUV, 2 cars behind her more often than not. When she jogged her usual trail, she caught glimpses of someone in a hoodie watching from the tree line, then disappearing as soon as she turned. What? For whom? The paranoia bled into everything. When Lila left her house, a package left on her doorstep with no postage, no return address. Inside, wrapped in soft velvet, was a necklace. Emily's necklace. The same one she wore in the last video call with her sister. The one that was supposedly never recovered. Lila stared at it, unsure if it was a warning or a plea. Tucked beneath it was a single sheet of paper.
Typed.
Cold. "She's still alive. But not for long if you don't stop." The message was calculated. Not just a threat, but a test. Someone wanted to see what she'd do next, whether she'd break protocol, go rogue, burn bridges. And if she did, they'd be waiting. Now, with Grace missing, her own safety compromised, and evidence being fed to her like breadcrumbs on a trap-laden path, Lila realized she was being manipulated at every turn. Someone wanted her to keep digging. Or maybe they wanted her to fall apart trying. Either way, every step closer to the truth made her feel more like she was walking straight into something she couldn't escape from. The question that once drove her, what happened to Emily, was now tangled in a far more disturbing mystery. Who was pulling the strings, and how deep did this web of control go? And just as she began piecing together the connections between Nathan's company, the missing women, and the pattern of psychological warfare, she got a final, jarring shock. A call from the morgue. A Jane Doe had been found in a storm drain, bruised, unrecognizable, but wearing the exact same necklace that had been left at her door. Which meant one thing. Either someone was playing a deadly mind game, or Emily wasn't the only woman Nathan had marked. And the clock was ticking. Just when Lila thought she had begun to see the shape of the monster she was chasing, everything fractured in a single, jarring conversation. It started with a simple knock at her door late one night, the kind of sound that makes your stomach drop when you're living under threat. She approached cautiously, firearm in hand, eyes scanning through the peephole, only to freeze. It was Captain Reeves. Not in uniform, not with backup, and not with the posture of a superior officer. He looked tired, nervous, and very much like a man carrying the weight of a truth he never wanted to share. Against her better judgment, Lila let him in. He stepped inside slowly, like someone walking through a graveyard, and without preamble he said, "You're chasing ghosts, Lila, and you need to stop before you become one." She stared at him, stunned, waiting for the punchline. But Reeves wasn't being cryptic for drama. He meant every word. He went on to explain that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Years ago, before Lila transferred into the department, another detective named Sophia Grant had been on a similar trail. Same kind of disappearance. Same pattern of manipulated evidence. She had gone rogue too, convinced she was onto something bigger than just one missing person. Then one day, she vanished. No body. No trace. The case was buried. The official report said she had a psychological break and ran off. But Reeves admitted now that was a lie, crafted by higher-ups under pressure from somewhere far above his pay grade. The message had been clear. Don't dig deeper. Let it die. Lila's mind reeled. Not just from the implications, but from what it meant about her own journey. Was she reliving Sophia's nightmare? Following the same carefully constructed breadcrumbs? And worse, was someone using her as bait? She pressed Reeves for more. Why now? Why come to her with this? He looked her straight in the eye and said, because someone hacked the precinct servers last week. They didn't steal anything, they added something. Your sister's file. It wasn't there before, Lila. We never had a missing persons case on Emily Monroe. Because she was never reported missing. Because, officially, she doesn't exist. The room spun. Lila felt as though the air had been sucked out of her lungs. Emily wasn't in the system. Not flagged. Not investigated. All this time, Lila had been operating under the assumption that the system had failed her sister. But what if the system had never even acknowledged her in the first place? Was this a clerical error, or something worse? And then she remembered. The original flash drive hadn't come to her through official channels. It was mailed anonymously, from an address that didn't exist. Had someone planted this investigation into her life, knowing exactly how she'd react? And if so, why? Desperate for clarity, Lila called her parents. Her mother picked up, clearly startled to hear from her, and when Lila asked, point blank, when did you last speak to Emily? There was a pause too long to ignore. Her mother stammered, then confessed that they hadn't seen Emily in over a year, but they hadn't said anything because they assumed she was traveling. She always disappears like that. You know her. But Lila did know Emily. And this wasn't like her. Not at all. The pieces started clicking into place, only they didn't form a picture. They revealed a void. In a moment of clarity, Lila did something she hadn't tried yet. She used a secure database through an old FBI contact to run a biometric trace on Emily. What came back didn't make sense. There were no fingerprints, no medical records, no school transcripts, not even a birth certificate. It was like Emily Monroe was a character in a play, someone who only existed in photos and memories, but never on paper. And then, like a punch to the gut, she thought of all the footage, always filmed from obscure angles, never with facial confirmation, always focusing on objects or voices. Could the woman in the videos not be Emily at all? Could she be someone else entirely? It was in that terrifying uncertainty that Lila realized she'd made a critical mistake. She had been chasing the disappearance of a person without first confirming that person truly existed. Someone had constructed an entire identity, embedded it into Lila's life, perhaps even into her mind. Could her memories be manipulated? Was her sister real, or just a pressure point designed to guide her down a very specific path? The flash drives, the threats, the footage, they were all tools. But for what? And then came the final blow. Lila received a new package, this time hand-delivered. Inside was an old family photo. Lila at 10. Her parents smiling beside her. And where Emily should have been standing, there was only a blank space. A literal blur in the shape of a girl, as though someone had carefully removed her from the image digitally and reprinted it with the alteration. Except it wasn't digital. It was an old Polaroid. Physical. Tactile. And absolutely real. Lila dropped the photo. Heart pounding, vision tunneling. What kind of game was this? How could someone erase a person from the past? From history? From memory? Unless they were never really there to begin with. And just when she thought it couldn't get darker, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. 3 words. No punctuation. No signature. Check your mirror. Lila stared into the mirror, her reflection clouded by steam and suspicion. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the message. Was it literal? Figurative? A warning or a taunt? She slowly stepped forward, heart pounding, and wiped away the condensation with trembling fingers. Behind her own tired eyes, she searched for something, anything, that didn't belong. But there was nothing. No shadowy figure. No words scrawled in blood-red lipstick. Just her own face, gaunt and hollow, shaped by fear and sleepless nights. And yet, deep inside, she knew the message wasn't about what she could see in the mirror. It was about what she had been blind to. Someone had been watching her, studying her reactions, feeding her clues like breadcrumbs, guiding her along this twisted path. But to what end? Desperate for grounding, she called the only person who still made her feel anchored. Noah, her ex-fiancé. They hadn't spoken in months, not since their breakup following Emily's disappearance. He had tried to be there for her, but Lila's obsession with the case had driven a wedge between them. Still, something told her he needed to hear what was happening. When he picked up, his voice cracked with hesitation. She barely got the words out before he interrupted, his tone strange, unfamiliar. He admitted he knew about the videos. About Emily. About the flash drives. Lila froze. How could he possibly know that unless he'd been involved? The pit in her stomach expanded into a hollow chasm. Noah didn't deny it. Instead, he asked her to meet in person, saying there were things he couldn't explain over the phone. He promised he wasn't her enemy, but he couldn't promise she'd like what he had to say. With every fiber of her being screaming against it, she agreed. When she arrived at the small, abandoned train station just outside the city, Noah was already there. He looked different, nervous, shaken, as if he were expecting someone to pull the plug on his life at any second. What he told her next shattered everything she thought she knew. He explained that years ago, long before they had met, he had been recruited into a private research group funded by a shell corporation, one deeply tied to experimental cognitive manipulation, memory interference, behavioral steering. Their work wasn't theoretical, it was in practice. Test subjects were real people, often unaware, sometimes even erased from systems, so no one would look for them. Emily, he said, might have been one of those subjects. But here's the part that made Lila feel like the ground had disappeared beneath her. So might she. According to Noah, their relationship, every twist, every moment, might not have been entirely organic. He had once been assigned to monitor her, to influence certain decisions, to build trust. But he insisted that things changed, that he fell in love for real, that he wanted out. He said that's why he broke things off. Because he knew that if the truth ever came to light, both of them would be targeted. Lila's rage swelled so hard it nearly overtook her grief. She wanted to scream at him, hit him, walk away, but part of her couldn't deny it. It explained too much. Why her investigation had led nowhere. Why leads vanished. Why some memories felt too perfect, too neatly placed. Was her entire life curated? Scripted? And more importantly, what was the purpose? Then Noah gave her a choice. He pulled a burner phone from his coat pocket and handed it to her. It had one number programmed in. He said if she called it, someone on the other end could make it all stop, wipe the drives, erase her involvement, give her a new identity, a new life. She'd disappear, and they'd never bother her again. But if she didn't call, if she chose to keep digging, she'd be on her own. No more protections. No more safety nets. And the people she'd already trusted, including her parents, Reeves, and even Sophia Grant, might all be part of the same machinery. The ultimatum carved a canyon inside her. She could escape with her life, but lose the truth. Or pursue justice and risk losing everything, including what little was left of her sanity. Lila took the phone but didn't answer. Instead, she looked Noah in the eyes and asked one question. Was Emily even my sister? The look on his face was answer enough. Lila drove back in a haze, too numb to cry, too alert to collapse. That night, her apartment was eerily quiet. The flash drives were gone, her files shredded. Someone had been there. They hadn't taken everything, they had left just one thing. A VHS tape on her kitchen table. Handwritten on the label in smudged ink was a single word. Proof. She stared at it, heart in her throat, every instinct telling her not to watch it. But she had to know. Because now it wasn't just about Emily. It was about reality itself. And whether Lila had ever truly lived in it. You said. Lila didn't sleep that night.
She didn't even sit.
She paced the floor in circles, trying to summon the courage to watch the tape. Her heart beat like a war drum, each thud echoing louder than the last. Eventually, when the first hints of daylight crept through the blinds and the city outside started humming with life, she loaded the VHS into an old player she'd borrowed from a neighbor and pressed play. The screen flickered. The grainy image rolled for a moment before settling on a static shot of a room, dark, windowless, lit by a single hanging bulb. Then a door opened, and what Lila saw next nearly made her collapse. It was Emily. But not the Emily from her childhood, not the smiling, mischievous girl she remembered chasing fireflies with on hot summer nights. This version of Emily looked older, worn down, terrified. Her hands were bound, her eyes darting toward the camera as if she could sense someone watching. A voice echoed from behind the camera, distorted and deliberate. It asked her questions about her family, about Lila, about the subjects. Emily sobbed as she answered, saying she'd never meant to expose anything. That she thought she was protecting her sister. That it wasn't supposed to go this far. Lila's stomach turned to stone. Emily had known. She'd been trying to warn her. This wasn't just some tragic disappearance. It was a silencing. And then, just before the tape cut to black, the voice said something chilling. She's almost ready. We've been watching her longer than you think. Lila stood frozen.
Who were they?
And what had they been preparing her for? The silence that followed was suffocating. She felt every molecule in her body tighten like a coiled spring. Without thinking, she called Detective Reeves, rambling through tears that she had proof, real proof, that Emily hadn't just vanished, she'd been taken. But as soon as she said the word tape, Reeves' tone shifted. He became eerily calm, too calm. He told her not to do anything rash. Said he'd send someone over to talk. But Lila knew that voice. She knew the pause he took, the stiffness in his words. Reeves wasn't shocked. He was scared. He already knew. That was the moment it all crashed down. The conspiracy wasn't just an experiment or a fringe project buried in a lab. It was systemic, controlled, woven into law enforcement, research institutions, the very people she had turned to for help. Everyone she had trusted had been keeping her on a path, one they controlled. Noah had been a handler. Reeves was a fixer. Sophia Grant? Likely a gatekeeper. Emily had been the outlier, the mistake that had tried to break protocol. And Lila was the experiment that got too curious for her own good. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her world had gone from grieving sister to whistleblower in the span of a few hours. Now she was a threat to something far more sinister than she'd ever imagined. Before she could act, before she could even run, her phone lit up with a message. Just one line. No number. No sender. Just a warning. Don't speak. Cameras are live. Panic shot through her like electricity. She looked around the apartment. She knew she was being watched, maybe even listened to. She needed to get out. But where could she go? Her family couldn't be trusted. The police were compromised. Every step she had taken had been monitored. Every move anticipated. She was caught in a web so deep that even the ground she walked on was part of the trap. She grabbed only what she needed, cash, the VHS, and her passport, and fled. No destination. No plan. Just movement. But as she slipped into the early morning crowd, something caught her eye across the street. A man in a charcoal suit, holding a cell phone. Not speaking, just staring. Then, a woman with a stroller who passed her 3 times in the span of 5 minutes. Familiar faces in unfamiliar places. They weren't just watching her, they were everywhere. The deeper she ran, the more faces began to stand out. It felt like the entire city had become an extension of the conspiracy. No one was safe. And then came the most devastating realization. This wasn't about hiding the truth. This was about controlling the narrative, shaping perception, turning victims into suspects. making sure no one would believe Lila when she finally spoke.
But she still had the tape.
And now there was no choice but to go public. She had to find a way to leak it, to expose the network, to force the truth into the light. But even as she formed the plan in her head, she knew someone would try to stop her. Someone already was. And the person closest to her, the one she was about to turn to for help, might just be the one who delivers the final betrayal. You said. Lila didn't know how she got there, only that she had to keep moving. The city blurred around her as she slipped through alleys, ducked under scaffolding, and rode buses with no destinations. Her only possession of value now, the VHS tape, was sealed in her coat, clutched like a lifeline. After days of cat and mouse, of cryptic messages and surveillance that made her skin crawl, she finally reached someone who hadn't yet vanished or betrayed her, an underground journalist named Kayla Voss, known online for exposing government secrets and silenced experiments. Lila had been warned not to trust anyone. But at this point, trust wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. They met in an abandoned printing warehouse on the outskirts of the city, where the hum of old machines masked the sound of panic in Lila's breath. Kayla, fierce-eyed and fast-talking, wasted no time. She hooked the VHS into a digital converter and began transferring it to a hard drive. Lila explained everything in rapid bursts. Nathan, the erased records, the planted memories, the threats. Kayla didn't flinch. Instead, she simply said, "You're not the only one." As the footage loaded frame by frame, the truth that had haunted Lila's every step came fully into view. It wasn't just Emily in that room. The same background, the same bulb, same walls, appeared in dozens of clips from different drives Kayla had collected over the years. Different women, different dates, different subjects. It was an underground behavioral operation run under the guise of a private foundation, one connected to tech companies, government think tanks, and biometric data centers scattered across the country. The people being studied weren't criminals or volunteers. They were outliers. Women who had the capacity to recognize patterns, to detect lies, to notice when reality didn't match what they were told. The project's goal wasn't to eliminate them. It was to rewrite them, reprogram their histories. When that failed, they disappeared. Lila was part of the project all along. She hadn't uncovered a conspiracy. She was the conspiracy. As the tape finished digitizing, Kayla turned to her and said they had to move fast. Her secure server would upload the file directly to encrypted platforms and leak it to journalists within the hour. But before they could move, the building's power flickered. Then a deafening silence fell. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something unnatural. Lila's instincts kicked in immediately. She reached for her gun, motioned for Kayla to back away from the monitors, but it was too late. The door burst open. A team of black-clad operatives stormed in, faceless behind helmets, and ordered them to the ground. But in the chaos, Lila recognized one voice, distorted through a radio, but still familiar. It was Reeves. He stepped into the room, no longer hiding behind suits or lies. He looked Lila dead in the eye and said, "You were never supposed to get this far." His tone wasn't angry, it was disappointed. He motioned to the monitors and ordered them destroyed. But before he could finish, Lila lunged for the backup drive and bolted through the side corridor. Bullets ricocheted off pipes and steel. Kayla went down. Whether dead or alive, Lila couldn't stop to check. She burst into the street, flagged down a delivery truck, and climbed in, screaming at the driver to go. They sped off, the city lights blurring into streaks as she clutched the drive, bleeding, breathless, and desperate. What followed was a chase unlike any she had imagined. Her face appeared on digital billboards as armed and unstable. Her apartment was burned to the ground. Her bank accounts frozen. They were erasing her in real time. But she had the drive. She had the truth. And in a moment of clarity, she turned to the one person she had never once suspected, her father. A quiet man who had spent years in a seemingly benign federal research job. When she showed up at his rural cabin in the middle of the night, he didn't look surprised. In fact, he opened the door like he'd been waiting for her. He didn't deny his role. He admitted it quietly, like confessing to a sin that no longer mattered. He joined the project in its earliest phase, thinking it was about national defense. He didn't know what it would become. When he realized, it was too late. But what he said next shattered everything. Emily never existed. We made her. To keep you in line. To see how long it would take before you noticed the seams in your own story. Lila stared at him, mouth dry, heart in freefall. He said they modeled Emily's personality from Lila's subconscious, using years of monitored interactions, dream data, and journal entries. They tested familial bonds, attachment under stress, and finally, response to loss. But the project had a flaw, one they hadn't predicted. Lila didn't just remember Emily. She loved her, fought for her. That kind of connection wasn't written, it was earned. That was the anomaly, the breakthrough. Lila wasn't the test subject anymore. She was the variable they couldn't control. She walked out, drive in hand, numb to the cold, immune to the fear. Somewhere deep inside, she knew the upload had to happen. Not for revenge, not even for justice, but to break the machine that had played God with people's lives. She uploaded the drive from a stolen device in a motel an hour later. It hit every major platform within minutes. But here's the twist no one expected. He begged her not to release the drive. Said it would trigger a failsafe.
That too many people were involved now.
But Lila didn't hear him. The footage was scrambled. The faces blurred. The voices distorted. The world didn't see what Lila saw. Someone had already intercepted it, rewritten it, turned her proof into disinformation. The comments filled with doubt. Conspiracy theories. Trolls. Gaslighting. Her story became just another internet rabbit hole. And when she tried to speak again, she was already gone. Or maybe she never existed. 2 of 2.
You said.
Months passed, and the name Lila Carson quietly faded from the headlines, lost in the algorithmic churn of trending news and viral distractions. Her upload had become digital folklore, debunked by some, dissected by others, buried under layers of speculation and online noise. People argued over whether she was a whistleblower, a mentally unstable woman, or just an elaborate hoax fed into the bloodstream of the internet by shadowy operatives to test public response. Whatever the theory, the truth was that no one could verify where she went, if she ever made another appearance, or whether the video was real at all. Government agencies issued statements denying involvement in any covert psychological operations, and the corporations named in the leaked footage all responded with carefully worded denials, calling the tape manipulated, deep-faked, and completely fabricated. In the end, the story unraveled publicly just as easily as it had unraveled privately, thread by thread, until it disappeared into static. But those who looked closely enough, they knew. They remembered her face, her voice trembling with urgency, her eyes haunted by truths she didn't want to carry. And those same people began to see things. Patterns. Gaps in their own histories. Small details that didn't add up. They noticed moments of déjà vu that felt too deliberate, relationships that shifted overnight, sudden urges to forget something they hadn't even realized they knew. It was subtle, but it was there, a ripple in the fabric of reality that could no longer be ignored. Somewhere far from the city, in a remote mountain town where cell towers barely reached and no one asked questions, a woman named Elise started working at a small bookstore tucked between a bakery and an antique shop. She kept to herself, never spoke of her past, and had no digital footprint. She spent her days shelving books with titles like The Ethics of Memory and Invisible Wars, and at night she'd sit by the fire with an old analog camera, taking pictures of the stars. Her landlord said she was kind, a bit quiet, but always paid on time and brought tea during storms. No one suspected she had once been at the center of something enormous, something engineered to destroy her sense of self. Elise was her new name.
Her choice.
Not assigned, not implanted, not programmed. Just hers. But even in that quiet life, far from the broken city and its hidden networks, Elise couldn't quite forget. There were nights when she'd wake drenched in sweat, heart racing, certain that someone was outside her window. She'd clutch a flash drive that never left her neck, Even though its contents were scrambled, unreadable, just fragments of the truth now, a puzzle no one could finish. Yet she held onto it like a relic of who she had been and everything she had lost. The twist, of course, was never just about Emily or Reeves or the shadowy institution pulling the strings. It was about something deeper, more unsettling, the idea that our memories, our identities, could be manufactured, edited without our consent. And if that's true, how do we know which parts of ourselves are real? How many of our relationships, convictions, fears, and dreams are authentically ours, and how many were subtly shaped to serve someone else's agenda? Elise didn't have all the answers, but she had something more important now: freedom. Not the kind measured in distance or anonymity, but the kind that comes from knowing the truth, no matter how fractured or terrifying it may be. She'd lived through the unraveling, survived the collapse of certainty, and rebuilt herself from the ruins. That, in itself, was an act of rebellion. Back in the city, Kayla Voss's disappearance sparked another brief surge of conspiracy chatter online, especially when her personal files were dumped onto a dark web forum marked with the tag #SyntheticTruth. Among the documents were partial blueprints, names, and timelines. None of it confirmed, all of it chilling. And in one final clip, grainy and full of static, a woman's voice could be heard whispering, "The system only works if you believe what it tells you to forget." That line became a mantra for a growing movement of digital dissenters, people who refused to let go of the story. They wore masks in protest, printed flyers with scrambled versions of Lila's photo, and posted videos that mimicked the style of the leaked footage. Whether they were chasing the truth or chasing shadows no longer mattered. The idea had taken root. Elise never joined the movement. She didn't return to expose more or reclaim her past. Instead, she lived quietly, breathing in her own rhythm, watching the seasons change without fear. But sometimes, when a stranger walked into the bookstore and looked at her just a second too long, she'd wonder if they recognized her, if they remembered. And once in a while, when she was alone, she'd speak softly to the air. "Emily, if you were ever real, I still love you." A whisper into the void, an echo of a connection too deep to erase. In the end, the story didn't go viral. It didn't get turned into a Netflix doc or make the front page of every paper. It just lingered, like static in the background of your favorite song, or a face in a dream you can't quite place. But for those who paid attention, for those who saw past the noise and dared to question everything, it was a warning. Some truths aren't buried. They're hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to notice. And once you do, there's no going back. Not ever.